Good evening. Um, we record these so I can remember what I say later on. Quite frankly. I love to listen to them later on because I'm like, wow, where'd that come from? So anyway, this is a continuing series. I've been gone for a number of weeks, but it's a continuing series on something I call the art of noticing. And it's based in wisdom teachings from different backgrounds and philosophies. I'm an ordained Buddhist, so a lot of this comes out of Buddhist psychology, which I don't know if everyone knows that there's a whole branch of psychology that's Buddhist psychology, not Western psychology, and much different actually. And there's other types of psychologies in the world. Everyone seems to think of the Western world as the inventor of psychology, but it's not exactly true. So anyway, a lot of the things I talk about have to do with trying to share a different way to see the world. Because I think when we grow up in a particular culture, and when we grow up in particular social norms, and we kind of learn about how to be in this life, we think it's the only way to be. And there are other ways to be. There are other things that are considered just as everyday and normal as the way we live. And so one of my goals in giving these talks is to try and share, again, a different perspective on how to stand back and look at our lives and lightly question whether or not what we truly think as being the way things are is actually that way. Now, we may question those things, and we may in the end go, yeah, that is the way they are. But sometimes we look at something in ourselves or in the world, we say, maybe that's not the way it is. So the art of noticing is learning how to become an observer of life, an observer of yourself, and to ask yourself questions without any loaded emotion to it. It's like, there's many things. All of us here are of a certain age that we've all been through a lot and done a lot, and we've learned things. And sometimes when those things are challenged, we feel really uncomfortable with the idea of changing the way we've always thought, because it's the way we've always thought. And that makes us feel uneasy, because it's like, well, if that's not true, then is anything true? Yeah, it starts to raise these questions in us. And I think learning how to do this in a non-confrontational way with ourselves allows us to be a little more gentle with ourselves and to be able to maybe modify or bring in new ideas or new ways of having relationships with things in this world that will make us be able to find a deeper sense of joy and understanding and peace. My particular interests in my life have always sort of geared themselves towards the Eastern philosophies and that, because I saw something there that I didn't see in Western philosophies. I studied Western philosophy. I did a tremendous amount of reading in my early days of all the different philosophers of Western thought. And there was a lot of really good things there. And when I started studying Eastern thought, what surprised me was the things that I connected with the Western philosophers were when they touched upon Eastern thought. Emerson, other people like that, Thoreau, these people, they, without even studying the Eastern wisdoms, I'll call them, we're touching upon those very same things about the nature of life, the nature of being, the nature of why we're here, all of those things. There's a commonality or thread that goes through there. So I don't find it challenging to look at other cultures with other ways of viewing things, because I believe that there's an overlap, and I believe if we look deeply enough, we see that they're actually, in most cases, speaking about the exact same thing, just with a different vocabulary and with different metaphors, because metaphors are cultural. I travel in India quite a bit, and I go over there and I hear stories, and I'll hear metaphors, and I don't know what they mean. they'll say, well, it's just like this, or this was as, and I'm like, since I don't have that cultural background, I don't understand the metaphor. It makes no sense to me. My brother was married to an English woman for years and years. She would come up with all these little colloquialisms, these little sayings. I had no idea what they were. She'd get mad and say, I'm going to go out in the garden and eat worms. I'm like, what? She goes, oh, it just means I'm mad, So the metaphors, the vocabulary that we use are different in different parts of the world, but they express the same basic emotions and feelings and thoughts. Because I think as humans, we all share a common sort of base, if you will, of the way we are. So what I speak about tonight comes a lot from different ways of thinking to look at what seems to us to be everyday occurrences, but trying to cast a different light on them to see if they'll open up for us, to see if we'll be able to get a little aha moment by looking at just certain particular things, by, for a moment, suspending what we know and considering what others know. Because we all think we know what is right. And probably at the end of the day, no one's right, but we all try and explain the inexplicable. And the reason I do this is because I've found such joy and peace and a way of fitting into the world by studying some of these things and experiencing them on an emotional and physical level, that I want to share these things. And I think other people could benefit from looking, not from what I've experienced, but from what you could experience were you to notice different things in your life and look beyond the usual everyday way of seeing things. So one of the things on my trip through the desert for 5 weeks that I noticed was that when we were out in places where you would look in every direction and for as far as you could see to the horizon, there was no evidence of human occupation. There was nobody, there was no buildings, there was nothing other than the landscape. And what came to me as I'm looking out there wasn't that, oh my gosh, what a lonely and desolate place. What came to me was this overwhelming feeling that the earth knows exactly what to do with itself. The earth knows exactly what can and can't grow in certain environments. The earth knows exactly what needs to be, where the compatibilities have to be so that plants and animals can survive in whatever the conditions they're in. And everything has absolutely nothing to do with humans in that environment. And I thought, well, that's really great because, we grow up thinking that we need to control things. We need to make things grow a certain way. We need to make sure that things are the way they are for us. And we try and we take certain areas and try and modify them to grow different plants, different trees, different ways of being. We bring water into the area. We recreate the landscape. And we think that that's necessary. And if we didn't do that, then it would just be wasteland. Well, wasteland, when I looked out over hundreds of miles of scrub brush, my first thought was every one of those scrub brushes is giving off oxygen into our environment. And if they weren't there, we probably wouldn't be alive. We always credit the trees with taking in carbon dioxide and giving off oxygen and allowing us to have a good environment to live in. But quite honestly, there are thousands upon thousands and thousands of miles of scrub brush, much more so than there are trees. And they're doing more for our climate and environment than trees ever did. And yet we look at that as land that's useless. So again, I looked at something that normally would bring up a certain feeling in myself, that this was useless land. Nobody lives here. Why does no one live here? Because it's arid, it's dry. Who would want to live here? So I would normally place no value on that. And yet, just by looking at it in a different way, noticing the difference, I noticed how beneficial it is to our very existence, even though we don't inhabit that area. So that's what I mean by this, is it's taking everything that we know, and that's a simple example, and I'll get into some deeper things here in a minute, but just taking something that simple and twisting it just a little bit and looking at it, all of a sudden insights flow out of it, and new ways of looking and new appreciations, and gratitude comes right beyond that. It's like, wow, this is really great. Do I want to live here? No. But I am grateful that it's there doing what it does for us. Because if it weren't there, we might not be surviving. And all those plants and animals and the ecosystem, the biosphere that's there, is all contributing to the overall health of the planet.